You're absolutely certain you're a rational person who makes logical decisions based on facts and evidence. After all, you carefully weigh options before choosing, consider pros and cons, and pride yourself on your objectivity. But what if everything you believe about your own thinking is an illusion? What if your rational mind is actually the junior partner in your mental life, called in only occasionally, while a faster, intuitive system runs the show? This reality-shifting insight forms the foundation of Daniel Kahneman's revolutionary book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, a work that has transformed our understanding of human decision-making and earned its author a Nobel Prize. Drawing on decades of groundbreaking research, Kahneman reveals that our minds operate through two distinct systems that shape every judgment and choice we make. System 1 operates automatically, intuitively, and effortlessly. It's lightning fast, processes information in parallel, and requires no conscious control. When you immediately recognize a friend's face, sense hostility in someone's voice, or navigate a familiar route while deep in conversation, that's System 1 at work. It's ancient, evolutionary, and essential for our survival, allowing us to react instantly to threats and opportunities without deliberation. System 2, by contrast, is slow, analytical, and effortful. It's the conscious, reasoning self that we identify with. When you multiply 24x37, follow a complex argument, or search for a specific person in a crowd, you're engaging System 2. This system monitors our behavior, makes deliberate choices, and can override System 1's impulses, but only when we invest the mental effort to activate it. The relationship between these systems is far from equal. System 1 continuously generates impressions, intuitions, and impulses that System 2 can either endorse, rationalize, or override. But here's the crucial insight that Kahneman's research revealed. System 2 is inherently lazy. It requires concentration and effort, resources our brains are biologically programmed to conserve. So System 1 typically dominates our mental life, while System 2 slumbers until needed. This cognitive division of labor works beautifully in many situations. System 1's intuitive responses are often accurate, allowing us to navigate complex social situations and physical environments with minimal effort. The problem arises because System 1, while amazingly efficient, harbors systematic biases and errors that the lazy System 2 often fails to correct. Consider this simple puzzle. A bat and ball cost $1.10 total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? If your immediate response was 10 cents, you're in good company. Most people intuitively arrive at this answer. But it's wrong. If the ball costs 10 cents and the bat costs $1 more, 110, then together they would cost 120s. The correct answer is 5 cents. Your System 1 suggested the intuitive but incorrect answer, and your System 2 likely didn't bother to check the math unless you deliberately activated it. This seemingly trivial example illustrates a profound truth. Even intelligent, educated people routinely make systematic errors in judgment and choice because System 1's intuitive responses feel right, and System 2 often fails to intervene. These mental shortcuts, or heuristics, evolved to help us make quick decisions with limited information, but they lead to predictable biases in the modern world. The anchoring effect demonstrates how arbitrary numbers influence our judgments. In one experiment, participants spun a wheel that stopped at either 10 or 65, then estimated what percentage of African countries belong to the United Nations. Those who saw 10 guessed 25% on average, while those who saw 65 guessed 45%, despite knowing the wheel number was completely random. Your mind unconsciously uses available numbers as reference points, even when they're irrelevant. The availability heuristic leads us to judge frequency based on how easily examples come to mind. After news coverage of a plane crash, many people temporarily fear flying, not because the statistical danger has increased, but because examples of air disasters become more mentally available. Meanwhile, we continue driving without fear, despite the dramatically higher statistical risk. Loss aversion reveals that the pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. Most people will refuse a bet with equal chances to win $150 or lose $100, even though the expected value is positive. This asymmetric response to gains and losses shapes countless decisions, from investment choices to policy preferences to consumer behavior. The sunk cost fallacy explains why we continue investing in failing projects because we've already spent resources on them. Whether it's sitting through a terrible movie because you paid for the ticket, continuing a doomed relationship because you've invested years in it, or nations persisting in failed wars because of previous sacrifices. The rational response is to consider only future costs and benefits, but System 1 can't let go of past investments. Overconfidence may be the most damaging bias of all. Most people rate themselves above average on positive traits, the Lake Wobegon effect, where all children are above average. Experts routinely overestimate their ability to predict outcomes in their field, and we consistently underestimate how long projects will take, the planning fallacy. This systematic overconfidence leads to failed projects, bad investments, and costly mistakes. The halo effect causes our overall impression of a person to influence how we think about their specific traits. If we like someone, or they're physically attractive, we automatically assume they're also intelligent, honest, and competent. A cognitive error with profound consequences for everything from hiring decisions to criminal sentencing. Framing shows how the exact same information leads to different decisions depending on how it's presented. When doctors are told a treatment has an 80% survival rate, they're far more likely to recommend it than when told it has a 20% mortality rate, though these statements are logically identical. Our choices depend not just on options' objective features, but on how they're described. The representativeness heuristic leads us to judge probability based on resemblance rather than statistical likelihood. When told Steve is shy, withdrawn, helpful, with a need for order and structure, most people think he's more likely to be a librarian than a farmer, despite there being far more farmers than male librarians in the population. System 1 ignores base rates and focuses on stereotypical patterns. What makes these biases so pernicious is that they operate unconsciously. We don't experience our intuitive judgments as interpretations, but as direct perceptions of reality. And because System 2 is lazy, it typically endorses our first impressions rather than doing the hard work of questioning them, particularly when those impressions align with what we want to believe. Kahneman's research reveals two different selves that shape our experiences and decisions. The experiencing self lives in the present moment, registering immediate pleasure and pain. The remembering self forms the stories of our lives, storing and evaluating memories. Remarkably, these selves often disagree about what makes us happy. In one experiment, participants endured two painful cold water immersions, a short trial, 60 seconds of moderate pain, and a long trial, the same 60 seconds followed by 30 additional seconds of diminishing discomfort. When asked which trial they'd rather repeat, most chose the longer experience because the remembering self cares about the ending and overall story, not the total amount of pain. The peak-end rule shows that we judge experiences based on their most intense moment and how they concluded, neglecting duration entirely. This distinction explains why we make choices that our future experiencing self might regret. We choose vacations based on anticipated memories rather than moment-by-moment enjoyment. We pursue career prestige that offers little daily satisfaction. We remember colonoscopies as less aversive if they end with decreased pain, regardless of total suffering. Understanding these two selves helps explain why our choices often fail to maximize our actual happiness. Kahneman's work carries profound implications for economics, challenging the rational agent model that underlies classical economic theory. Traditional economics assumes that humans make consistent, rational choices, to maximize their self-interest. But Kahneman's research with Amos Tversky demonstrated that actual human behavior systematically violates these principles. Their prospect theory showed that we evaluate options relative to reference points, not absolute outcomes. We're more sensitive to losses than equivalent gains. We overweight low probabilities and underweight high ones. And we make risk-averse choices for gains, but risk-seeking choices for losses. These patterns explain real-world phenomena from consumer behavior to financial markets that traditional economic models can't account for. This work helped launch behavioral economics, a field that incorporates psychological realism into economic analysis. Its insights have revolutionized areas from public policy through nudges that work with our cognitive biases rather than against them, to finance, explaining market inefficiencies and bubbles, to marketing, designing choice architectures that influence consumer decisions. Yet despite these advances in understanding human judgment, Kahneman remains humble about our ability to overcome cognitive biases. System 1's intuitive processes are largely automatic and resistant to change. Simply learning about biases doesn't eliminate them. Even experts trained in statistics and decision theory continue making systematic errors when not explicitly applying their analytical tools. While System 2 can override System 1's impulses, this requires vigilance and effort that we cannot maintain continuously. The best approach isn't trying to transform our intuitive reactions, but recognizing situations where errors are likely and deliberately engaging our analytical faculties in those high-stakes moments. Organizations often achieve better results than individuals because they can implement procedures that counteract biases. Structured interviews prevent hiring managers from relying on first impressions. Checklists help surgeons avoid overlooking critical steps regardless of fatigue or distraction. Pre-mortems, imagining a project has failed and explaining why, counteract overconfidence and groupthink. These procedural safeguards acknowledge our cognitive limitations rather than pretending we can overcome them through willpower alone. The practical implications of Kahneman's work extend to virtually every domain of life. In personal finance, understanding loss aversion explains why investors hold losing stocks too long, hoping to break even, while selling winners too quickly, locking in gains. The solution isn't becoming emotionless, but creating rules and systems that protect us from our worst tendencies. In health decisions, knowing about availability bias helps us evaluate medical information more accurately. Just because a friend had complications from a procedure doesn't make it statistically dangerous. Conversely, just because a disease is rare doesn't mean it can be ignored if risk factors are present. In relationships, recognizing the peak-end rule explains why a thoughtful conclusion to a difficult conversation can transform how it's remembered. The duration of conflict matters less than how it's resolved. In productivity, the planning fallacy reminds us to multiply our time estimates by 1.5 or more, especially for complex projects. Our optimistic predictions consistently underestimate obstacles and complications. In politics, understanding cognitive biases reveals why facts rarely change minds. People evaluate new information through existing beliefs, confirmation bias, interpret ambiguous data to support their side, motivated reasoning, and remember facts that fit their narrative while forgetting those that don't. These aren't failures of intelligence, but features of normal human cognition. Perhaps most profoundly, Kahneman's work offers a more accurate and compassionate view of human nature. We aren't perfectly rational beings occasionally derailed by emotions. We're fundamentally intuitive creatures who developed reasoning as a specialized adaptation for certain types of problems. Our cognitive limitations aren't personal failings, but the product of evolutionary history. This realization doesn't mean abandoning reason, quite the opposite. By understanding our mind's inherent biases, we can design environments, institutions, and personal practices that support better decisions. We can know when to trust our intuitions in familiar domains with clear feedback, and when to question them in novel situations where subtle statistical relationships matter. Ultimately, thinking fast and slow offers not just scientific insights, but a path to greater wisdom. It teaches us intellectual humility, recognizing that our perceptions, judgments, and memories are constructions rather than perfect recordings of reality. It shows that skilled intuition requires specific conditions to develop, and it reminds us that the effortful thinking of System 2, while mentally taxing, remains our best defense against the errors that intuition inevitably produces. The next time you make an important decision, whether about your career, relationships, health, or finances, remember that two systems are shaping your judgment. System 1 rapidly generates intuitive responses based on associations, memories, and emotions. System 2 can analyze more systematically, but requires deliberate activation. By understanding how these systems interact and where they tend to err, you gain a critical advantage that most people lack: awareness of your own cognitive machinery and its predictable flaws. This doesn't guarantee perfect decisions. Nothing can. But by recognizing the difference between thinking fast and thinking slow, and deliberately engaging your analytical capacities when the stakes are high, you'll avoid many common errors that derail even the most intelligent people. In a world of increasing complexity and information overload, this metacognitive awareness may be the most valuable skill of all. So the next time you feel absolutely certain about a judgment, remember, that feeling of certainty is itself produced by System 1, and it tells you nothing about whether your conclusion is actually correct. True wisdom begins not with confidence, but with understanding the limitations of our own minds, a journey that Kahneman's work illuminates like nothing before it.